Hello and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in work and in life and simplify them. And friends, the voice that you're going to hear today is one that you have heard on this podcast before, because let's face it, he's a friend of the Simplifiers podcast at this point. And I love this topic because it comes up so much. It's actually one of the top episodes that we've had over the last 5 years. It's simplifying the 5 love languages. Now, you know about the 5 love languages that sold maybe 20 million books around the world over the years. And so let's take a little bit further. Let's talk about how to put the 5 love languages into action. So I'd like to welcome to the podcast once again, the author of the 5 love languages, Dr. Gary Chapman. Hey, Dr. Gary.
Hello, it's great to be back with you, Mary.
Oh, Gary, so much has happened since we last spoke. And I feel like this is the 4th time you've been on our podcast. And, you have to say, now that we are post-pandemic, things are opening back up again. Life is starting to get to a level of normalcy for a lot of us. It's nice to kind of revisit and go back to the basics when it comes to connection or, human connection with our relationships, our neighbors, our coworkers, and beyond. Don't you agree?
I think so. I think the pandemic took all of us to a new place.
Yeah.
And we survived, but I think we still have scars.
No joke.
I think we were built for interaction with other people. I mean, in real life. Mm-hmm. And yes, you can communicate ideas and information online like we're doing here. But there's something about that personal contact with people that is all of us need. And I think we're beginning to, rediscover that, and we're reaching out, and things are getting better. But it's been a real trial, I think, for many relationships. During the middle of all that, I wrote a little book called 5 Simple Ways to Strengthen Your Marriage When You're Stuck at Home Together. Oh, but I guess even when we're not stuck at home together, we all need help in our marriages.
Mm-hmm. No joke. And, I think that for me, the pandemic and lockdown, it taught me to kind of get back to basics, to strip everything down, to slow down, and remember what's most important when we're connecting with others. So I can't imagine there is a person on the planet by now who doesn't know what the 5 love languages are. But let's just give a recap in case you are one of those people. No shame whatsoever. Now, let me give my brief overview. And then, Gary, I want you to tell me, did I get it right or not? And fill in the blanks.
All right.
Gary here, very smart man, and has a theory that every single person on the planet has at least one primary love language, a way that they like to receive love and feel appreciated. Am I right so far?
So far, so good.
Okay, good. And those 5 love languages are this: quality time, words of affirmation, acts of service, gifts, or physical touch. And there may be one that you may like all 5, but there's one that's really your thing in particular. And that's the basis of this work. Did I get it right?
Yeah, it's a simple concept, really, when you think about it. But the reality is, if they haven't read the book or heard somebody talk about it, likely they haven't thought about it.
Yes.
I did not for years until I discovered it in my counseling with couples, that what one person considers to be expressions of love doesn't register with the other person, emotionally. So I had husbands who would say, I don't understand why she doesn't feel loved. I wash the dishes, I vacuum the floors, I wash the car, I walk the dog, I change the baby's diaper, and she says she doesn't feel loved, So I knew you could be sincere, but still be missing the other person emotionally because you're not speaking the right love language. So, it's a simple concept, but it has a tremendous impact upon the emotional nature of a marriage.
Yeah. And so to go into a little bit further detail of those 5, can you give us an example of each? So quality time.
Yeah, quality time is giving the other person your undivided attention. The TV is off. The computer is down. you're not answering your phone. They have your full attention. And you're listening, you're talking, you're interfacing with each other. And it doesn't have to always be sitting down. You can be taking a walk down the road, but you're giving each other your full attention. Sometimes it's not even talking. It may be they have a project. They want your help. Maybe it's starting a flower garden. And so the two of you are out in the yard together, working on this project together. She has your full attention as you do it together. And she feels love. So for some people, that is their primary love language, quality time.
Yes. And words of affirmation, what does that mean?
It's looking for things about the other person that you can genuinely affirm. You know, you look nice in that outfit. I really appreciate what you did. You know, one of the things I like about you, and you just tell them something you like. Yeah. I did have a lady say to me, she said, Gary, I would like to do that for my husband, but to be honest, I can't think of anything good to say about him. And I said, well, does he ever take a shower? She said, well, yes. I said, how often? She said, every day. I said, if I were you, I'd start there. Honey, I appreciate you taking a shower.
Sometimes it's the little things in life, right?
Absolutely. Really, I've never seen a man or a woman that you couldn't find something good to say about them. And for some people, if you give them critical words, you know, and you're putting them down verbally, it's like a dagger in their heart. It's the opposite of what they long to hear, that there's something good about them. So for some people, if you don't give affirming words, they will not feel loved.
Yeah. And then the next one, acts of service. What does that mean?
It's doing simple things that you know your spouse would appreciate. It may be taking out the trash, cooking a meal, washing dishes, vacuuming floors, walking the dog, you know, changing the baby's diaper. You know the old saying, actions speak louder than words. If this is their love language, that's true. It's not true for everyone, but it's true for them. Actions will speak louder than words.
Yeah. And then from there, gifts.
It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. Yeah. My academic background before I studied counseling and theology was cultural anthropology, the study of cultures around the world. We've never discovered a culture where gift giving is not an expression of love. The gift says, they were thinking about me. Look what they got for me. And it doesn't have to be expensive. We've always said it's the thought that counts. But I like to remind folks, it's not the thought left in your head that counts. It's the gift that came out of the thought in your head. Okay?
Yeah.
It can be as simple as a candy bar from the grocery store. You know, honey, I was thinking about you, and I got your favorite candy bar. Yeah. You know, or it can be something obviously more expensive. But if this is their language, you'll hear them make comments along the way. Oh, I'd like to have one of those someday. Or isn't that really nice? You know, take notes, and buy them something that they would really appreciate.
And for people who gifts are their love language, I mean, it reminds them, hey, you're thinking about me. Oh, that you went out of your way specifically to give me this very, very tiny token of a gift. It means a lot for them.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And now, of course, physical touch. I think we all know that. It's a holding hands. It's a pat on the back. It's a fist bump. It's a tap on the shoulder, right?
Yeah. Any affirming touches. Now, we hear a lot today about abusive touches in cultures. That's not love. That's the opposite of love. Yeah. So it's not physical abuse. It's affirming physical touches. And if you want to know what would affirm them, ask them. You know, does it make you feel loved if I put my arm around your shoulder? If they say, no, that irritates me, that's probably not their love language.
Yeah. And back to your point, I mean, I think that this is what's really, really genius about the 5 love languages is that you can't just think it. You have to do it. That's one point. But then equally, when you start to hear these 5 love languages and you break it down, you go, you know what? I really appreciate words of affirmation the most. And you give that to other people, your spouse, your kids, your neighbor, your coworkers. And you're like, well, I don't understand. I keep giving them the thing that I like the most. The aha moment is you have to give them what they want the most, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it's not a matter of trying to manipulate your spouse or force them to speak your love language. If a husband and wife would do this together, they both learn each other's primary love language. Now they have information
Yeah.
If they really want to express love, here is the most powerful way they can do it to their spouse. And chances are the husbands and wives' love language will be different.
Yeah.
Seldom do they have the same love language. But by nature, we do what you were alluding to, that is we speak our own language. So if words is ours, we give them words. I did that in my marriage before I knew anything about love languages. I gave my wife words of affirmation. And I don't know, maybe 2 months into our marriage, I would tell her I love her 2 or 3 times a day and how much I appreciated her and so glad I married her. And she said, you keep on telling me you love me. If you love me, why don't you help me?
Yeah.
And I said, what are you talking about? She said, you don't ever offer to wash dishes or vacuum floors, or you don't offer to do anything. And I didn't say this, Mary, but in my mind, I was thinking, woman, what are you talking about? My mama did those things. We bring our history with us, If mama did it, I expect her to do it. I like to tell men, you're not married to your mama. You best find out what makes your wife feel loved and speak her love language. She was telling me acts of service was her language and I wasn't hacking it.
Mm-hmm. It's a game changer. Once you understand the premise of this all, and once you understand your primary love language and then the people's around you, it all of a sudden puts a different lens to everything, how you communicate, where you prioritize your time, and how you nurture that relationship. And again, what I think is also really wonderful, Gary, and, I've interviewed quite a few people in your circle, Dr. Paul White, Arlene Pelican, like all of these really brilliant people who have now taken the 5 love languages and adapted it for different audiences, like the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. This translates to your boss, to your coworkers, your colleagues across the hall. It translates to how you communicate and connect with your neighbors, your kids, your parents, your grandparents. I love the fact that it is a framework that helps you, bottom line, be a better human communicator and love transmitter to all people that you come in contact, even strangers at the grocery store, right?
Yeah, and the reality is almost everyone agrees that one of our deepest emotional needs on the human level is the need to feel loved by the significant people in your life. And whether it's any one of those relationships. And when you do feel loved and appreciated, life is beautiful.
Yeah.
When you feel like people don't love me, if you're married, they wish they weren't married to me, then life begins to get dark. And really, a lot of the misbehavior of children grows out of the fact they don't feel loved.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not that parents don't love them. I remember a 13-year-old, he had run away from home. He was in my office and he said to me, my parents don't love me. I knew his parents. I knew they loved him. The problem is they never learned that he has a primary love language and they weren't speaking it. So consequently, he wasn't feeling loved, even though they loved him. So I like to say to parents, the question is not, do you love your children? The question is, do your children feel loved? And the love language helps you communicate love effectively.
And this work is pivotal for so many around the world. Now, you have a new book that's come out this year, and it's called Love is a Choice, 28 Extraordinary Stories of the 5 Love Languages in Action. And I want to dive into a few stories in here, because here's the key word in my mind. Yes, it's good to know about the 5 love languages, and it's great if it's in theory to a certain extent. But again, it's not something that we just feel. It's something we have to do. We have to put into action. So I want to share 3 stories and ask you a little bit more on that so that people can start painting a picture in their mind of how they can put the 5 love languages to action in their worlds as well. So the first story I want to bring to the light is a story. I love it. It's called A Simple Cup of Cheer. Would you mind telling us that story on how a random act of kindness can truly make a difference to a stranger?
Yeah, this was a couple, and incidentally, all these stories are written by the people. I didn't write their stories. I just comment on their stories at the end, showing how this demonstrates the love languages. There's a couple that were taking a vacation, and they were going to Carlsbad Cavern and wanted to do a hike. And they pulled up to the gate that took them in, and the rangers were there, and they were telling people, I'm sorry, but the snow is on the roads. It's not safe, and we've had to close the park. And the gentleman heard the person in front of him just lash out at the rangers. What do you mean? It's not snowing that much. No. And he was beginning to feel sorry himself for the rangers, putting up with that kind of response. So when he got up there and they told him the same message, he said, well, thank you for looking out for us. He said, I know it's cold out there, so thank you for looking out for us. He was giving words of affirmation to the ranger. Well, he and his family turned around and went back down the road and stopped at a restaurant. And they got some coffee and some hot chocolate for the kids. And while they were sitting there, he said, why don't we buy some coffee when we leave and take it back up there and give it to the rangers? It's cold out there. And so they did. And he said when he pulled up and said to the ranger, my wife and I and the kids were down there and we were having coffee. And I thought, man, we ought to bring you some coffee because you're out there in the cold weather. So I've got 3 cups of coffee here. If you'll give them to the other guys there as well, we'd just like to give some coffee to all of them. So he called the other rangers over, and told them what was happening. And they just expressed appreciation to him, for doing that. And he said, what I saw in their faces and the way they responded was more meaningful than a hike would have been in the canyon. And again, it's just simple things. But Mary, to be a lover, we have to have an attitude of love. That is, be thinking about, how can I enrich the life of the people I encounter today? I mean, that was a simple thing. And yet it was the opposite of what the person in front of him did. The other person was thinking selfishly, well, I'm going to miss my little trip here into the canyon, But when we think in terms of love, we're thinking, how can I enrich the other person's life? And the happiest people in the world are people who have that attitude. And if you have an attitude of love, then you will find ways to express love to other people.
I really appreciated this story when I read it, because how many times have we been in situations where we've been go, fast, working on a deadline, got to get somewhere, or even, to this point, like you've planned the quote unquote perfect vacation for your family. You get there and some curveball happens and you just get so all zoomed in on yourself and hyper focused on how this affects you and how your whole life is, blah, blah, blah. And it sort of gets exasperated. And I talk about this a lot on the podcast of just taking a moment to zoom out a little, because I think our modern day culture is so geared towards us zooming in and being hyper focused on my comfort level as it is. And that we forget that there are so many other people we interact with, not only in our inner circle, but absolute strangers that we can actually make a positive impact on. That's the secret, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I was in an airport just last week, and I noticed a man. He was well-dressed like a businessman, and his son was sitting beside of him who was also well-dressed. And so I just walked over to them, and I said to this young man, I said, I just want to say to you, you look like a very sharply dressed young man. Mm. And I said, my prediction is that in the future, you're going to make the world a better place to live. And he said, well, thank you. And I looked at his father. I said, are you his father? And he said, yes, I am. Mm-hmm. I said, what is your vocation? And he said, I'm an attorney. And today I took him to court with me. So he saw me in operation for the first time today. I said, oh, man, that is wonderful. And I just said, well, what I said is true. I think as you grow up, you're going to have a positive impact on the world. But you never know. That young kid may remember that 20 years from now when that man walked up, and said that to him. And it may also plant the seed. He has potential of doing great things in the future. So we all have opportunities every day. But as you said, we're so into ourselves that often we miss those opportunities. And that's why I say having an attitude of love is the starting place to having the impact on the world.
Yeah. And just imagine this kid probably doesn't know that Dr. Gary Chapman said that thing to him, right? The five love languages guy, isn't that so wonderful? I think that that's the moments it doesn't matter who you are that's listening to this podcast right now. We each, no matter if we are just a everyday average person or the president of the United States, we each have such an opportunity to make an impact on people's lives. And we can do it in such tiny, like you say, plant a seed kind of moments that 99.9% of those moments pass us by because we're so zoomed in on how our life is not comfortable or not exactly how we wanted or expected it to be, right?
I think if we think about it,
yeah,
we're going to find great satisfaction in reaching out and touching other people that we encounter. It can be a simple little thing. It can be something obviously much more complex.
Yeah.
But if we have the attitude, the behaviors will follow the attitude.
Yeah. I want to shift to another story in the book that really touched me. It's called Between Mountain Streams and Ferris Wheels. And in this story specifically, it was a husband and wife, and they were really struggling on one person really, really loves to go hiking and go out in nature. And the other one really, really loves to be at the beach. And just noticing that one person was always just disgruntled or disconnected in the vacation, and the other one wasn't so great either. Comes up the word of compromise, which I think sometimes people get a little bit like compromise is a dirty word or a negative word. And I'm just curious what your take is on it. Is compromise a negative word when it comes to a friendship or a relationship? And why or why not?
I think compromise is a needed word, and especially in a marriage, because let's face it, we don't always have the same thoughts and the same desires and enjoy the same things. And that story is really pretty powerful because she liked walking on the beach, and he didn't like sand on his toes. And she liked the boardwalk at night with all the people and the fanfare. He didn't like being around all those people, so close to all of them, But he fortunately realized that he wanted to enter into her world. If this was something she enjoyed, he didn't have to enjoy it, but he was going to choose to do it with her and the children. And so many times that is a compromise. That is, we do things with our spouse or with our children, not because we particularly enjoy doing those things, but because we want to be with our children, with our spouse, enter into their world. And later on in the story, she told about a time that she actually went turkey hunting with him, which involved getting up at 3 a.m. and going out in the dark. And it kind of rang a bell with me because my wife is a symphony gal. And, I'm not very musical. But I remember the first time I went to a symphony with her, and I found out what an oboe is. And and so this is really a part of having a healthy marriage, and also allowing the other person to do some things on their own too. If she wants to go to the symphony with some of her friends, well, that's fine with me. Letting each of you have time. And in this story, he was a fisherman, and on their 1 year anniversary, they went on a little trip. So here he is down fishing in the river, having fun. She's sitting in the car sulking. This is not the way I thought I'd spend my first anniversary. She hadn't learned yet the compromise thing. She was just saying, this is not right. This is not good, So I think learning how to find a middle ground on the things that we disagree on in a marriage is what a compromise is all about. It's finding something that we both feel good about, at least acknowledge that this will enhance our marriage relationship. So compromise is a huge issue in marriage.
Yeah. And, I really like how you phrase it of just getting to see inside the other person's world. I think that helps you go, oh, okay, I see a little bit more. Like, what makes this such a great thing for you? Like, why are you so passionate or excited, or your face lights up when you get to do this specific hobby or task or go to this certain place, like going on a hike in the woods or going to the beach or going scuba diving. when you start to appreciate and get more perspective of what really lights another person up, then it's like, well, that's showing me a whole nother layer of intimacy and true connection with that other person, right?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It communicates that you are into me. You are thinking about me. You're respecting my interest. I remember a lady who said, I don't understand my husband. He goes in these car races, and these cars are going round and round and round and round and round for hours. I don't get it. And I said to her, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't get it either. I said, but he's your husband. And if he enjoys it, why don't you at least go and be pleasant at least one time? Just give it a try and be pleasant when you're with him and try to, make the most of it and just see. And I reminded her about my own journey. I said, I didn't used to like symphonies either, but I've gone several times now and I kind of like it now. Not as much as my wife likes it, but I kind of like it, But you don't have to like it. It's just choosing to do something that they enjoy and they would like for you to do it with them, Yeah. And if he doesn't want you to go to the car race, that's fine. Then give him the freedom to do that on his own because it is something that he enjoys.
Yeah, because let's face it, I'm not a skier. You won't find me going down a mountain in a snowboard, but I sure do like a cappuccino in a ski lodge. So you can also get to a location and go, well, maybe that's not my thing, but you can enjoy it and I can be with you for certain parts of it. And here's how I'm going to enjoy it. And we come together in the middle, to meet for dinner or whatever. I think that's the beauty in this story of just remembering that compromise is not a dirty word. And that it's an integral part of really building a deep relationship or friendship with somebody across the table.
Yeah.
So the third story I want to bring up is called the trials and errors story. And let me just ask you this. What advice would you give couples where one person's natural response is to try to fix the other person? I'm sure there's quite a few listeners out there that have, either been on one side or the other side of that table. When one person's their natural response is all about fixing the other person instead of simply loving them in their love language. Tell us the story and let's talk about that.
Yeah. And again, let's just face it, it's natural for some people to want to fix things.
Yeah.
And often it's the man, not always, of course, just a part of his personality. And in this story, he was that kind of person. And his wife really had some struggles in the first several years of their marriage, actually. He said, I never forget the day she cried for an hour because she couldn't find the cucumber slicer. And I said, honey, why don't you use the knife? And she said, I don't want to use the knife. I just want to find the slicer. And he said, she'd call me at work just sobbing because she burned the dinner that night. And I said, we can go out, honey. It's no big deal, And, just things like that. She would call and say, I can't find the remote. Can't find find my keys. And then that was the first year of their marriage. And he said, they'd always told me it was the hardest year. He said, it was. But then they decided they wanted to start having a family. So they tried for a whole year and were not successful in getting pregnant. Well, she was really down about this, and she felt badly about it and so forth. And then they went to a little weekend retreat that had a counselor type person there, and they were each kind of telling their story. And so when she got to the point where she told the part about their infertility, she just started sobbing right there in front of everybody. And the counselor asked her, after they'd listened a while, do you feel like your husband was with you and supportive of you, in your pain? And she said, no. He said, I was shocked. And he said, when was I not apart? When was I not with you? She said, well, I remember, he said, she mentioned something 3 months ago. Then one night she said, I was just so hurting so much. And you just laid over there and acted like you were asleep. Maybe you were. And I tried to wake you up. And when I did, you said, not again. And you threw the cover back and just walked out of the room. You weren't with me. Well, he kind of woke up after that and began to think in terms of, how can I be with her? Counselor shared with him, when she's hurting, she doesn't want you to fix whatever it is that you think is causing her pain. She wants you to listen to her and be empathetic with her and just say, honey, I can see how that would be painful for you. And he said, it's okay to say, is there anything I could do, to be helpful, but maybe not. Maybe just listening to her and asking her questions about her pain and just identifying with that, And eventually he learned how to do that. And whenever I think for the first time, he listened to her talk and share whatever she was struggling about and said to her, honey, I'm beginning to see how that would be very, very painful.
Yeah.
I feel for you, and I'm with you in this. And he said, I think it was the first time that I ever realized the pain of grief, when she was suffering over the loss of things and not having a baby, for example. And he said, after that, I would just sit with her. Sometimes put my arm around her, sometimes just put my hand on her leg and just sit there. And if she wanted to talk, let her talk and then ask questions, And he said, now I cannot imagine having a loving relationship like I have with my wife. He said, I can't imagine loving anybody the way I love her. And now we have 2 adopted children. And I'm glad I learned how to be empathetic with her, whatever she was struggling with, so that I'm setting an example for my kids on how to relate to people who are not like us. So, I think we all have to recognize that many times there are many people when they're sharing a pain or a hurt, they're not expecting you to fix it. They just want you to listen and be empathetic and affirming in their touch and be with them in their pain. And they sense your love. And what you're doing is giving quality time. Mm-hmm. You're devoting time to focus on where they are at the moment, and you're giving your full attention to it. Mm-hmm. He said, I'd get irritated sometimes. I'd be working on something in my office, and she'd walk in and say, "What you doing?" And he said, "I'm busy." And she said, "Can we talk? Would you like to do some things together?" And he said, "I'm thinking, woman, I'm busy, And he said, I felt badly about myself when I did it, but she was begging him for quality time. Yeah. And this is, again, why it's so important to know the love language of the other person. And you can sometimes understand their complaints if you understand the love language concept. Because all along through those years, she was begging for quality time with him. Yeah. And if he couldn't fix it, he was aggravated with it.
Yeah, it's picking up on those.
It's a huge lesson for couples. I mean, I think that story is going to help a lot of couples. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I really appreciate that story because over the course of my lifetime, I have been one person on this side of that table, the one that's been fixing others, and the other person that's been getting fixed. And neither side is very fun in that dynamic in a relationship or even in a work relationship. No one really likes to be fixed and no one really likes to be the fixer over time. And one thing that I have started doing both in my work relationships and in my personal relationship is, when we get to a situation where somebody is sharing something very vulnerable to me or a challenge or a tough day or whatever, I try to listen, make good eye contact. And I always start by saying, do you want advice? And let them answer the question. Because by just saying that, I think it changes the dynamic rather than going straight into, oh, Gary, that's horrible. Let me tell you what you should do. Right? That was old Mary. That's what I would have done. But I stop and I pause and I say, do you want advice? And then sometimes people say, yeah, can you give me some guidance? And then I'll say, well, have you thought about blah, blah, blah? Or the other person just goes, no, I just need you to listen. And it's like, oh, okay. Yeah. It gives me a moment to pause and not just step into the fixer role. So if you're out there listening right now, give that a test this week. When you get yourself in that situation, just ask that simple question. Do you want advice? And let them answer. Yeah. This book is so wonderful in that it's a continuation on, if you are very familiar with the 5 love languages and wanting to kind of re-spark it in your own relationship or your work relationships or friendships or otherwise. I just love that it is 25 or 28 different writers and 28 different voices putting the love languages into action. So I highly recommend checking this book out. It's available wherever books are sold currently. Love is a Choice, 28 Extraordinary Stories of the 5 Love Languages in Action. So Gary, as we wrap up, I just have a couple of questions for you. You know the drill because you've been on the podcast so many times before that I ask every single guest that comes on our podcast. So here goes. First question is this: what's one book or blog that you're reading these days that's either inspiring or poking holes and challenging your belief system?
Well, I read a lot of books by other authors, some of them asking me to endorse them. and sometimes I'm reading them before they're ever published as well. But I really do like books that are written by Shanti Feldheim. And her most recent book is on, I don't even remember the name of it, but it's on the sexual part of the marriage. She's a Harvard gal. She's a committed Christian. And she writes about this whole area. And this is an area I think that sometimes couples don't talk about. They just kind of try to figure it all out without talking. But working through a book like that would be very, very helpful. So it's Shanti Feldheim. And again, I don't remember the name of the book, but it's got sex in the title. That I do remember.
Gary, I got you. We'll put the link in the show notes for everybody. You just go over to the simplifierspodcast.com. You'll find the link for Shanti's work and her book there if you're curious and want to learn more about it. I believe gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what are you grateful for today?
You want to repeat that?
I believe that gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what's one thing that you're grateful for today?
My wife. I say that immediately because 11 years ago she had cancer. She went through all the chemotherapy, lost her hair, the whole bit. She calls it her lost year. But today she's wonderful and she's all behind her. And when you go through something like that, you have a deeper, I was always grateful for her, but you have a deeper, appreciation for the fact she's still here. And here's the other thing I found out in that context. The things that irritated you earlier on, when you go through something like that, you not only accept them, you just laugh about them.
Yeah.
Like, for example, the way she loads the dishwasher, it's like she's playing Frisbee and they're just all thrown in there. And it used to irritate me. But now when I look in there in the morning, because I'm the morning person that unpacks the dishwasher, I look in there and just laugh and say, God, thank you that she's still here to throw them in the dishwasher.
I love that story. Give Carolyn lots and lots of love from me. Please do.
I will do that.
I also want to ask you, it's so nice to sometimes throw a little bit of love out into the world. If there's one person out there that is just up to brilliant things we could shine a spotlight on, tell me, who is someone we should interview on the podcast next that you think is doing great things?
Well, a guy that I really do like is John Trent. He wrote The Blessing along with Gary Smalley, number of years ago. But it's a very keen concept that will help the parents in particular, but it also applies in other relationships to verbally give a blessing to their children. So that's a book I could fully recommend, and a person I could recommend, for our podcast.
Brilliant. Well, we will link up John Trent in the show notes as well. Again, you can find his work over at the simplifierspodcast.com for this episode. Now, if you're looking for Gary and his work online, it's the number 5 lovelanguages.com. That is also, we'll put all the social media links in the show notes for you as well. So Gary, as we wrap up another brilliant episode, and thank you so much for sharing your stories with us. My last question for you is this: someone, somewhere is listening to us right now and they're thinking about those 3 stories, and there's one that really resonates with them the most because it's specifically something that's happening in their life, what's one thing you could whisper into their ear right now just to encourage them in this moment?
I think what I would say is, don't think of love as a feeling you have for someone else. Think of it as an attitude that you have towards someone else. Because sometimes if you've been hurt by a person, you don't have positive feelings toward them. But if you see love as an attitude, you can honestly say, okay, I don't feel like doing this, but I want to enrich their life, and I know this would be meaningful to them, so I'm going to do it. So it's making that distinction between love as a feeling and love as an attitude. And that will help you in a lot of situations when you think, because see, we choose our attitude. We don't choose our feelings, but every single day we choose our attitude. And so to me, that's a really key factor in building good relationships.
Gary, big love to you. Thank you so much for the work that you do out in the world.
Well, thank you, Mary. And I appreciate what you do. So keep up the good work.
Thank you so much.